slave to the darkness. If it wasn't for the cross, you have won me with your kindness. Chase me down when I was lost. Where would I be if it wasn't for the cross? Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. I was a prisoner. Now I'm not. With your blood, you bought my freedom. Hallelujah for the cross. All my shame was met with mercy. Now your mercy will be my song. And oh, the glory, oh, the power of the cross. Oh, hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. I was a prisoner. Now I'm not. Oh, with your blood you bought my freedom. Hallelujah for.
Hey, good morning. We want to welcome you. We're so thankful that you're here with us this morning and have the opportunity to worship. We're going to do things just a little bit differently this morning. And so here's what we want to do. We want to invite you to stand with us. You know, every morning can be an awesome morning or it can be rough. And really it's up to us to decide whether we want to embrace the simple gifts and the simple blessings that God's given us or whether we want to ignore those. And one of the best gifts that God's given each and every one of us is the breath in our lungs. And so this song, we simply want to use that breath just as it says and pour out our praise before God. And so God's giving you breath. Let's turn that breath back into praise for Almighty Creator. So sing this with us as we sing and as we worship God this morning. Sing this out.
You give light, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord.
Sing this, it's your breath.
It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord.
Let's sing that again. You give life.
You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. Your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only.
Amen. We just want to take a second. Let's pray. God, we're so thankful that we can come to you. God, that we can worship you. God, that we know that you are listening to every one of our requests. God, some of us, as we walk in this room, we're struggling with feeling broken, with feeling alone, with feeling hopeless. And so, God, as we lift our voices, as we pray, as we use the breath in our lungs, God, we simply want to ask that you would help fill the voids in our life, fill what's missing, and help us feel, God, like we are whole because we are in you. And we pray all this in your name. Amen. All right, as you make your way back to your small groups, go ahead and split into those. But we're excited about what's to come this summer. There's a lot of awesome things coming up. But the thing that we're most excited about is Flight Week 2019. So check out this video.
Let me show you what it feel like, cause ain't nothing else gon' feel right. There's nobody better, nobody ever, you the trendsetter. There's nobody better, nobody ever, you the trendsetter. At your door like Belvedere, Graceland like Elvis here. A mansion in heaven, no hell to fear. And on my days, my God is near. Always on top like a chandelier. I keep it $1,000, no racketeer. 3 on my side like the Musketeers. And he walks with me, it won't disappear. No. There's really no holding me down. These rivers of water come up from the ground. Every time I come around, cause I roll with the greatest who's holding the crown. Everything that I got in this life, I'ma give God all the glory. And he go before me, he writing my story right. We these new disciples, Holy Spirit living, Holy Spirit driven. We believe the Bible. I know that Christ was risen, now he thrown sitting. They gon' think we psych.
Yeah. Hey, are you excited for Flight Week 2019? I know I am. I am so excited. So make sure register today if you haven't already. Start to make directions towards that and register. Hey, we want to welcome you if you are have not jumped in with these. On Wednesday nights, we've been doing something a little bit different, a lot like this, and we jump into our small groups. And so we want to invite you into those small groups. They're called our City Crews. They go on after the service just for about 15, 20 minutes. So we want to invite you to jump into one of those, and gives you a chance to kind of dive into the message on Wednesday a little bit deeper and form some relationships, maybe with some people that you don't already have a relationship with. In addition, we want to tell you that this coming Wednesday, we are doing what's called our summer celebration. And simply all we're doing is we're gonna come together, we're going to do worship musically, and then we're just gonna have some fun, some fellowship, hang out, eat some food. And so we want to invite you to that as well, to have fun as we celebrate the official Start of summer. We're excited about that. And then the last thing is I want you to know if you're following along, or if you're not, if you have the Bible app on your phone, you can follow along with us, kind of follow along with the message as we walk through it. I'll have the passages. If you're like me and you like to write a bunch of stuff down and you feel like you don't have enough time to write stuff down, this will help you a ton. A lot of the things that we say are in this, so you can immediately copy it and put it to a note. So follow along with us. We're going to jump in the book of Ruth this morning. And today what we're going to look at is the hope of redemption. And so we've been walking through the book of Judges, and we talked about how that whole entire historical time the book of Judges covers can be summed up as basically a downward spiral, where the people, they keep turning away from God and they keep doing what's right in their own eyes. And now the opening verse of Ruth, it sets the scene for kind of a new chapter in the midst of that time. It tells us that the story we are about to read and the story that we are about to see happen during that same time. It's chaos. There's a downward spiral as the people do what's right in their own eyes. And so get this, in the midst of death, in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of unrest, we see the story of Ruth. And the story of Ruth is a story of beauty, and it gives us a glimpse into order and into life. In fact, the book of Ruth has often been called a literary masterpiece due to kind of its cinematic nature. It's like a movie, and you'll see why in just a little bit. But it has 4 chapters, and it's written almost like a 4-act play. Each chapter has a clear opening. It has a concluding paragraph, and each centers around an important dialogue. And these dialogues, they center around 3 main characters. So these are the 3 people we're going to be kind of talking about today. Number 1, a lady by the name of Naomi. And then you have who we're going to find out is her daughter-in-law. Her name is Ruth, and a guy by the name of Boaz. And unlike the characters that we've kind of talked about thus far in a lot of these other books that we've talked about, these ones are not important judges. They're not kings. They're not prophets. They are simply kind of ordinary, an average family dealing with some of the everyday life struggles that you and I have. And so in chapter 1, it sets the scene by telling us that there was a great famine in the land. That word famine simply means a time of hunger where food was not easily found. And these families are dealing with starvation because of the lack of crops and food. And so this famine forced this family of 4, a father, a mother, and their 2 sons, to ultimately migrate to a place called Moab. And while they were there, the 2 sons married Moabite women who are from that land, but then they and their father all died. And so what we're left with is 3 remaining women. You have Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law. One was named was Orpah, not important for the sake of our story this morning, but the other one was named Ruth, and it's a really cool thing that happens with Ruth. But all 3 of these women were in a helpless and a hopeless situation, and here's why. For a woman in ancient Israel, these were absolutely the most extreme and desperate circumstances that a woman could find herself in. And here's why I say that. In this culture, the male would ultimately provide for and protect for the wife. And so without the help of a husband or sons, these 3 women were basically left with absolutely nothing and no prospect of ever getting out of this jam, out of this season of struggle. And so Naomi planned to basically go back home, and in verse 8, she told Ruth and Orpah, her other daughter-in-law, basically, go back home to your families because I have nothing left to offer you. And Naomi knew that she had nothing to give them, and she basically told them in verses 11 through 13, look, I have nothing more that I can offer for you, that I can give you, and if y'all stick around, here's what's going to happen is y'all are going to share the same fate that I am. You're going to be left basically alone. You're going to be left as a widow, left destitute without nothing. And so notice what happens. I want you to see how they responded in verse 14. It says this in chapter 1, verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and they wept again. This was certainly a season of weeping for all 3 of them. And so this news was just something else that kind of added to that sadness and that sorrow. But I want you to notice this part. It says, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but notice the contrast. But Ruth clung to her, means held her close, didn't let go. And then verse 16, he goes on and says, but Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for wherever you go, I'm going to go with you. And where you lodge, I will lodge. So whether you're going or wherever you're staying, I'm going to be there. And notice she even goes as far to say, your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts from me. And so Orpah went, but Ruth stayed. And basically what we see here is that her love for her mother-in-law was too strong. Like, she loved her incredibly, and that amount is seen by this action. And this love that she had was steadfast. It was the fact that nothing could separate them, not famine, not alienation, not homelessness, nothing would ultimately cause her to sever her relationship with her mother-in-law, Naomi. And I want you to notice that there's a really, really beautiful picture that we see of the purpose of the church within Ruth's actions here. Like, we see a beautiful picture of the church to ultimately cling to those who are broken and serve them while they're suffering. And so as you are in your groups, here's the first question I want you to discuss is, why is having community so important when we're suffering? So think about that question for just a minute. All right, we have Samson. He's going to run around with the mic. If you have something, what is your answer to this question? Why is community so important when we're suffering? I know I saw a hand up here in this front right section.
Thank you. We said something big about how community is important when we're suffering because it's different than having friends who will stand, like Melissa said, who'll be on your side and agree with you and help and comfort you in the way like you're doing what's right. Mm-hmm. But community is there not only to get you through it, but to hold you accountable, like and keep you on the right path and show you what God has to say about it.
Very good, very good. Very good. Yeah, community is important to help you stay on the right path. Go ahead.
From like personal experience when my family was going through things and like I felt depression and everything and I didn't want to come to church, I still came. But over that summer at camp, the community here, like with my church group, it's a strong impact. It's like something you really never feel before.
Yeah.
It's like you know that when you tell them something, they won't judge you or anything.
Yeah, that's good. Hey, that's a really cool point. I want to end on that thought because one of the biggest misconceptions that people have and know about the church, you're good, Samson. One of the biggest misconceptions that people understand about the church is they think, for me to be at the church, I've got to get everything figured out. Like I got to clean myself up. I got to make sure that I don't have any sin. I got to make sure that that all my things are in order and that I look like a Christian should look. That's the farthest thing from the truth. Like the perfect place for you to be when your life is falling apart and everything's struggling and you don't understand it, the perfect place for you to be is right here. So I appreciate that. That's an incredible piece of wisdom, is that when you're depressed, when you're struggling, this is the place to be. This is community. We can help you and walk you through that. In fact, we find out that community as a whole, and we could kind of sub that word for our church, our student ministry, it's vitally important to the Christian. Like it means everything to the Christian. And community is why the church is such a big deal. Our church as a place, but also as a group of people, is one of the primary ways that we can experience community. And if we're doing this community thing properly. In other words, we as Cross City Church and you as Cross City students, if we're doing that properly, it means that you shouldn't have to feel like you're walking through valleys alone. Like if we're doing our job as a church properly, it means that you should feel always like you have someone who will walk alongside you in the worst times. Naomi had that kind of community in one person. It was Ruth. And so as the story moves on, they make it to Bethlehem where they were heading. And Ruth asked to basically help provide and take care of Naomi by working in the fields. She wanted to take care of her and said, "You don't have a means of providing for yourself, so Naomi, let me do it for you. I want to work on your behalf." And so Ruth 2 says this, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and let me glean." That word glean just means to kind of take or harvest. And she says, "Let me glean from among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, Naomi talking to Ruth, "Okay, go ahead, my daughter." And so check this out. Ruth not only vowed to never leave Naomi, but she went even as far as to offer her own service and to go into the fields and work so that she could collect all of this food that she could basically for both of them. And so in this time, here's what would happen is farmers, they would leave crops kind of at the edge of their fields. In certain farms, they would put them in certain areas. And the reason they did that, this was special grain that they would leave to the side. And that was because anybody that didn't have what they needed, anyone who would come in need, who was homeless and in need of food or whatever the case may be, they would have a place that they could go. And so they would take what they needed for work, and then they would set aside some extra so that anyone who was in need would be able to go and find it. And this was a command that God gave them back in Leviticus 19. And so Ruth showed the utmost love, loyalty, and humility and service and all these things by ultimately offering to come and gather this leftover grain that would be left behind by these farmers. And notice what happens in verse 3. It says, "So she set out and she went and she gleaned in the field after the reapers." In other words, after the workers had gone. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And I want you to notice what the writer said. It's a very, very cool point. We'll kind of end up on this in a little bit. But notice that she just so happened to end up in the field owned by a relative named Boaz. Love that wording that the writer uses here. But I want you to hold on to that phrase. We'll come back to it in just a little bit. But Ruth lands in this guy Boaz's field, and Boaz had an honorable reputation. In fact, if you look at verses 8 through 12, notice kind of why he has that reputation. He goes above and beyond what's expected or required to take care of Ruth. He says to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not glean, do not harvest in any other field or leave this one. I want you to stay right here." He says, "Keep close to my young women." And then he goes on, he says, "Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them." And he says, "Have I not charged the young men not to touch you?" In other words, I'm protecting you and making sure that no one takes advantage of you. He says, "And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." And then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner?" a really cool thing is she knows that this treatment is not normal. Boaz is going above and beyond what's ever required or was ever even considered. And she says, I don't understand why you're treating me so good. Like, I'm not even from here. Why are you taking care of me like this? But Boaz answered her in verse 11. He says, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. In other words, I've seen your faithfulness to your mother. And I've seen how you left your father and your mother in your native land, and you came to a people that you did not know before. And so he says, the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward will be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And so in verse 8, here's basically what's happening, is Boaz tells Ruth not to go to any other field. He says, I'm going to take care of you. You don't have to worry about anything. He said that I'm going to provide, I'm going to protect you from any other guys, I'm going to give you food, drink, and he even invites her to eat with him. And Boaz even ordered extra grains again to be left. So not only am I going to give you what I would normally give someone who's kind of begging and in need, but I'm going to make sure they leave extra behind because I know what you're trying to accomplish. And Naomi, I want both of y'all to have plenty of food. And so here's the heart of Boaz's message to Ruth, and I love this truth. He's basically saying, I don't want you to glean or harvest like a beggar. I don't want you to look like you're homeless or you're in need. I want you to glean like this field is yours too. And so he says simply to follow my workers and go get the good stuff. Everything I have, I'm giving you insight into. He says, don't let your thirst slow you down either. Make sure stay hydrated. If you need water, go grab it as much as you need. But we can't miss how amazing this moment is. It's a beautiful moment because Boaz had given Ruth, a Moabite stranger, someone not even from his land. He had given her all the credentials to work basically if she was belonging there and was a part of his very own group. Why? Because he was a gracious man. And he embodied the grace of God. That's exactly what God does for us. And there's, again, a beautiful picture that's seen here that I want us to look at. See, what Boaz did for Ruth, ultimately God did for us, only to a much greater degree. He saw that we were in need and said, I'm not going to treat you like a stranger. I'm going to bring you into my very near presence. I'm going to give you all that I have. And so everything that I have because of my grace, it's now yours. And so as we look back to kind of our community idea, if God did that for us, what we have to know is that we have to be doing that for others. We see a perfect example illustrated here by Boaz. And so again, in your groups, discuss this question. Similar to the way that Boaz demonstrated the loving welcome of God to a stranger, how can we as the church show this kind of love towards others? Think about that and talk about it for just a second. Alrighty, as we, the church, how do we exemplify that exact same love to others that Boaz did for Ruth? Let's see, anybody have something, Daniel?
Just by being kind and by serving however much you can to others.
Yeah, very good. Hey, really quick, on that thought, he said to be kind and loving to others. If I were to ask you, when you think of the term Christian, what's the first word that comes to your mind? How many of you is it a positive image? Raise your hand. If it's positive, raise your hand. Very cool. How many of you, let's be honest, it's negative? Here's what I find is that we ask that in this room, and a lot of us will raise our hand because we're Christians. But if you ask unbelievers that exact same question, they'll probably raise their hand for the first, because we as a body, typically, they've known so many people. More people are pushed away by the church a lot of times than brought in because we're not loving and we're not kind. So very, very good point. The first step in us loving someone is simply by encouraging them, being kind to them. Next one.
By inviting that kid who's like having a hard time at their house to come stay with you.
Yeah, very cool. By opening up our home, very good point. One of the ways we can be the church is simply by opening up our homes and our things to people. I had one over there, I think, to your left. I'm glad I got that on the fly. Alex in the corner. Thanks, Samson. Appreciate you, man.
Here's something that Mel like drives into us all the time, is especially when we're first going into a new school year. I know school's about to end. Don't judge me. Looking for the people in like the cafeteria who aren't sitting with anybody and not sitting with your own friends that you planned with, but seeing someone who might want someone to sit with them or doesn't have anyone else to sit with them.
Yeah, very good. Thanks, everyone. Give it up for Samson, my dude. Appreciate you helping us. Well done, my friend. If I were to ask you this question, would you go to the ends of the world for Jesus? Think rhetorically in your head, what would you say? I think for a lot of us, the answer is automatically yes. I would do anything for God. But what I find is that a lot more often, we wouldn't even go to the other side of the lunchroom for him. And yet we think we would go to the ends of the earth for him, but practically we wouldn't walk across the lunchroom and sit with that person who's alone. We say, man, I would die for Jesus. Someone asked me right now. But the problem is in the breath that he's already giving us, we're not even living for him. And so there's kind of a discrepancy in what we say and how we're actually living out what we are doing. And the thing is Boaz, his words were backed up by his actions. He showed love and service far before he ever said anything about what he was about and his belief in God or his understanding and his relationship with God. He went above and beyond what was required, what was expected to take care of Ruth. And when Ruth returns back to Naomi is so shocked. She says, who took such good care of you? Like, who's been watching out for you? Because this is way more than I would have ever expected. And Ruth says it's actually a man by the name of Boaz. And then Naomi tells Ruth, she says that Boaz is not just a random guy. This guy Boaz, he's actually related to me. Naomi's talking to Ruth. She says, in fact, in chapter 3, verse 20, Naomi tells Ruth that Boaz is what's called a kinsman redeemer. Now, I want you to lock onto that term for a second. It's a foreign term to us, a kinsman redeemer. But that term is very important to this story. See, a kinsman redeemer simply means one who brings back or delivers through difficulties. In this sense, kind of more practically, it was basically a relative of someone who had died. And so what they would do is this kinsman redeemer would take a widow like Ruth and would marry her so that he could protect and ultimately provide for her. So this is very foreign for you and I. I'm not going to lie. It's different because our culture is not accustomed to this. But this was how they took care of widows. Let's say I was living and my brother wasn't married and I died and something happened to me. And my wife has our little son that's coming and he's born. My brother would then take her hand in marriage so that he could provide and protect. It's foreign to us. It's weird to us. But this was how they would provide and take care of the widows. And so this guy Boaz was one of that. He was related. And as a result, he was a person who could come in and take them out of this hopeless situation. And so he took her. Keep in mind that the hopeless situation that they're in. Ruth is serving in the fields, and that was a good solution, but it was temporary at best. It was temporary at best. And so Boaz offered what was the only permanent solution to their hopelessness to get Naomi and Ruth out of that situation. And so in the closing chapter of Ruth, we finally get our storybook ending, our happily ever after, as the two, they get married, and the suffering and the season of great sorrow and loss, the season of sacrifice, it's over. Their provider and their redeemer had arrived. And so we'll look at verse 13 in chapter 4. The Bible begins and it says this: "So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife." And I want you to see how God blesses this family. And he went into her and the Lord gave her conception and she bore a son. And then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel." Meaning, basically, may he be famous for what he did in providing and protecting them. And it says, "He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of you for your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." And then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." Obviously, this was Ruth's kid. It was her grandchild. But basically saying, Naomi, this is just as much your kid as it is Ruth's. Now, I want you to notice this. They named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. And that may mean nothing to you right now, but I want to connect the dots. Because from this story, we learn a lot of cool things, a lot of incredible truths. But I want you to focus on 3 overarching points this morning as we close. The first point is this, is that God is in control. God's in control. See, Ruth and Naomi, they were both presented a seemingly hopeless situation. Because they were widows, they had no one to protect them, they had no one to provide for them, and they were seemingly destitute, left alone with nothing to their name. But notice the wording that we talked about earlier. Ruth just so happened to end up in Boaz's field. And they just so happened to lead to a marriage between Ruth and Boaz solving their problems. See, we say it just so happened, and the writer uses those terms, but what we find out is that God was in control of their life the whole time. And I want you to know that what God was doing in this story was actually much bigger than their life. See, what God was doing in this story and this family would ultimately affect all of humanity for all of history. See, we just mentioned that Ruth and Boaz, they had a kid, and their kid eventually led to a guy by the name of David. David was one of the largest and greatest kings in all of Israel, but this union eventually led to a king that was held in much higher regard than David. And if you open your Bible, you don't have to flip there, but in Matthew 1, we see what that's talking about. We read that Jesus, the Savior of the world, the King of Kings, actually came from the line of David. David from Ruth and Boaz. And so Jesus, the Messiah, came from this couple. And at the end of the day, nothing truly set this couple apart. They were just ordinary people. They weren't impressive. They weren't royalty. They were just an ordinary couple. And their story seemingly has a bunch of insignificant things. But in the midst of all of those insignificant events, God was working to bring all of humanity the Messiah known as Jesus Christ. Incredible what God did through 2 people in what seemed to be random. Ruth just so happened to be in his field. They just so happened to get married. But God had this planned all along. And it's important to know that in Ruth, God's work is often disguised as these kind of just so happened events. But here's what we learned. As was with the case with Ruth, I love this truth. Every single random coincidence in our lives, it displays the masterful work of God's complete control. Everything that we think is a coincidence is God displaying his masterful work and control. In fact, coincidences in our lives are merely the fingerprints of God's hand at work. In other words, if you're in here this morning, you say, man, I'm struggling to see how God's moving in my life. Start to look at some of the coincidences in your life. The things that seem random, and you're like, man, I can't believe all this fell into the perfect timing. Those are the fingerprints of God's hand at work in your life. I can look back on my life and I can trace 100 different things that could have went differently, 1,000 different things that could have went differently to not put me exactly where I've been put. I talked about it in the case of my relationship with my wife. There are so many things that could have changed and went differently to where we wouldn't have been together. We wouldn't have got married. We wouldn't have had our kid that's coming. All of those things could have been messed up by one decision, and yet God orchestrated every bit of it. When I look back, I see moment upon moment that just seemed kind of random at the time. And I look back and I say, man, that was God's fingerprints at work. I could see his hand moving all the pieces as he would. And I want to encourage you, it's the same way in your life. So if you look at your life and you say, man, I don't see God moving, look back and look at all the coincidences. Look at the seemingly random events, because I promise God's hand is at work in ways that you'll never understand. And I believe that if we take a step back from all the chaos sometimes that our life is, those low moments, those valleys, if we step back, if we even look at some of those ordinary and everyday things, ultimately what we will see is we will see God's fingerprints at work. The second thing I want you to know is not only is God in control, but God still redeems. God's still in the business of redeeming people, of bringing people back to him, of delivering people and providing for their needs. And he provides for people spiritually, but he also provides for them physically through us and through his own provisions. It's a key point of what he's doing. He used Boaz to redeem and provide for Ruth. He uses us to redeem and provide for other people physically. Spiritually, he's provided everything that people would ever need in Jesus Christ. So 2 ways he redeems. And the third thing, and I want you to really pay attention to this one, is this story between Ruth and Boaz, it gives us real relationship goals. For the guys in this room, Boaz provided for Ruth far beyond what was required or what was even needed. He protected her. He didn't take advantage of her in any way. In any and all situations, what he did was he dealt with Ruth with utmost honor, with utmost integrity, utmost loyalty, and ultimately love. There is no greater standard than his actions towards Ruth. So if you want to look like what it's like to be a man in a relationship and what you should be doing with your girlfriends, it's that right there. You should be providing for her at all costs. That doesn't necessarily mean financially. That means spiritually, emotionally, encouraging, loving her, not taking advantage of her. That is huge. This is the standard of a relationship. Now, girls, I want you to notice what we learned from Ruth. There is never a need to pursue a guy who doesn't protect and provide for you far beyond what's required. Guys, we know that's the standard. Girls, don't fall below that standard. One of Ruth's most attractive qualities, besides the fact that she had incredible love and loyalty to Naomi, was her character, and get this, not chasing random guys who weren't good enough for her. Ruth was told what the standard was. And Ruth spent no time wasting pursuing guys that didn't follow the standard. Girls, don't lower your standard. You have a perfect standard here. Don't lower that standard. And the last thing is again, never settle for anyone less than that. You have a perfect standard, guys and girls. Pursue that at all costs and never let that fall. As we finish our time together, I want you to discuss these last questions. I'm going to pray and we'll get into these questions. But the last 3 questions kind of hit on those last 3 points. Is the first one is, what does Ruth's story teach us about God's control, and how does that control encourage you? How does it encourage you that God is in control over your life? Second one is, how does God redeem, or how does God deliver people today, both physically and spiritually? And the last one is, what can you learn from Ruth and Boaz regarding your relationship? And when we answer that question, I want you to be personal, be specific. How can you grow in your understanding of your role in a relationship? Not necessarily how can we be better at being in relationships. I'm saying, how can you personally take something away from that to be better? Let's pray, and we'll finish these last few questions out. God, we're so thankful that we have the opportunity simply to come to you and to worship you. And God, we pray that as we talk about this incredible story, we see the beauty in it. We see the fact that, God, you are in control of every minor detail, every major detail in our life, and God, that you are working all those things for our good. God, I pray we never lose sight of the fact that you are redeeming us and buying us back to you. And God, I pray that we never settle and lose a standard in a relationship. God, that we would always hold ourselves and hold our significant others to a high standard so that we could get the most glory from relationships. God, that we would be able to worship you through relationships. We pray all this in your name. Amen.